Okay, welcome everybody. June 7th, 2017. This is our 8th edition of Fuse Training. We are actually going to talk about valuations and inspections today. So you can kind of see that down there. A little side note, next week as we dive back into week one, we're going to consolidate and we're going to move some stuff around a little bit. I found that paperwork, this initial one, paperwork was a really long class. So I want to turn that into two classes, one on listing paperwork and one on buyer/selling paperwork. So I'm going to turn that into two classes. We're going to keep sales and marketing. We're going to keep electronic transactions. I'm going to consolidate, I think, finance into one class. And then the rest of them, we'll see how it goes. This one's not going to be very long, so I might consolidate this into another class. Real estate inspections, appraisals, and valuations. It's important, but it's not nearly as important. Sales and marketing and the paperwork are the most important. Fuse training, how we use lending to leverage real estate sales, and all that is really important. So anyway, let's dive right into it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Beautiful day up here in the Northwest. Allergy season is still going strong. It's just nuts. If you have allergies, you know what I'm talking about. We're at the height of it right now. So there's kind of, in Spokane, there's kind of a yellow dust that's blowing through the wind right now. As I look out that way, we're up on the 6th floor, so it's a nice view. If you guys haven't seen it, actually, I'll show it to you. And I'll turn the camera that way. So, actually, I'm going to pause this just for a second. Hold on, I got to take care of one more thing. Okay, thanks again, everyone, for joining us on June 7th, 2017 for real estate inspections, appraisals, and valuations. We're going to start with inspections, and it's a really important piece of real estate to get an inspection done. So every state legislature really wants, and every state's real estate commission really want you to encourage your clients to get an inspection. It takes a lot of heat off of us. There's a lot of things that can happen if people decide to sue or if something goes wrong with a house. If an inspection has been performed, it really relieves that liability. The liability increases exponentially if we don't encourage our clients to get an inspection, or if they do want to waive an inspection, we really want to make sure we either talk them out of it or we make sure that in writing they know what they're doing. So it's very, very important to encourage them to get the inspection, but if they're going to defer, we want to make sure it's their decision. The last thing we ever want to do is say, hey, don't get an inspection. It's just a waste of money. Don't worry about that issue that could come up later. That's when we run into real problems. So please, please, please encourage your clients to get inspections. And then if they are going to waive it, get it in writing and make sure that we know it's their decision. I'll just share a couple anecdotes as we go along here. Again, now that we've got more than 10,000 transactions under our belt as a company, we've seen a lot, and we've been sued for certain things, and inspections certainly always come up. And we have had one in the past where a client bought a house. They had buyer's remorse. They bought a farmhouse that was 110 years old. And they gutted it, and they found out, surprise, surprise, it had electrical wiring from 1908. Yeah, I mean, shocking, right? And so anyway, they didn't do an inspection because they were going to gut it. And then when they found out the wiring was substandard and they had to replace all the wiring, they decided to blame us. And our agent had encouraged them to get an inspection, but they said no, again, because they were going to gut the house. We made the presumption, I think, that they're going to rewire it because they're going to gut it, and they didn't want to rewire it. And we ended up winning and everything in court, but they really turned the table on us. And so it can always happen where the buyer or the seller, they act in good faith for the most part, but if something goes south and they end up losing some money, they're looking for someone to blame. So inspections are a real key component. Now, so inspections in the timeline of a purchase and sale agreement, you're basically, you're coming to agreement on that price, you're coming to an agreement on closing date, how much earnest money, and everything else. And so you've got that purchase and sale agreement. Well, once it's all signed around, and that last signature and that last date is the signed around date. So the signing period could go on for 2 or 3 days, but it's that last date that really begins that process. And here in Washington, we've got 10 days to inspect. Other states have 7 days to inspect. I'm sure there's some out there that probably have 2 weeks to inspect. You can always change that. You can say, okay, in writing that we all agree that it's going to be 14 days to inspect. It could be that inspectors are very, very busy, high time of the season, like right now in June, or you might be going on vacation and you want to be there for the inspection and you're not going to be back until next week, and so you want to do a 2-week inspection. My advice to everybody is get that inspection done as fast as possible, because there's a few reasons. The most important reason is that you don't want to delay the appraisal any longer than you have to. And I don't like ordering both of them at the same time, because if an inspection comes back negative, then the buyer shouldn't have to pay $500 for an appraisal as well. If they want out, they want out, and let's limit the financial loss. It's also better to know early, because then you can mitigate any sort of problems that do come up. We've got some kids out there. If you guys can, please mute. Let me see if I can mute here. Alex, let's see.
I'll go through and mute them.
Can you? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and mute everybody. And then if you guys have questions, again, do it on the chat room. You know, so if you just type in the questions, Alex will see it. But we're trying to limit barking dogs, screaming kids, stuff like that, so that everybody can hear. So the other part of the inspection process, why we want to do it fast and quickly, is because if there is an issue, if there's something has to be taken care of, we want to stay on track to get that closing date, to close within that closing date. And if something that's going to be a big project, it could be replacing a sewer line. It could be, you know, repairing the roof, and it's high time, high season, and the roofers aren't available. So it is important that that first week we get that inspection done if we can. So the purchase and sale happens, and you've got this great deal, $500,000 sale. There's a full 3% commission. There's $15,000 at the end of it. Kelly Wright commission means you're keeping pretty much the whole $15,000. So it's an exciting period, but that's really where you have to roll your sleeves up and you go, okay, now we've got this purchase and sale agreement. What next? Well, you want to encourage your borrowers to, or your buyers, if they're going to do financing, to make sure that they begin their finance process. So making application. But ordering that inspection is the first thing we do and help them do. Now, the client is paying for the inspection. And you know, they can let their fingers do the walking. If you guys are young, you don't remember that. We actually used to have books with phone numbers called the Yellow Pages. But metaphorically, they can let their fingers do the walking on the internet and find an inspector there. We should have in all of our offices a few different good inspectors, and they can call them up and say, hey, my name's Joe Kelly. I haven't worked with you in the past, but I'd like to see if I can arrange an inspection at 123 Oak Street within the next few days. Are you available? And inspectors are typically out and about. They might answer their cell phone, but they very likely are up on a ladder. They're on their hands and knees underneath the house poking around. So they typically will call you back. Sometimes they want you to email them as well. But communicate, reach out to them, and see if they can do it. If you trust them and you have a good relationship, typically they'll say, hey, yeah, don't worry about it. I'll be out at 123 Oak Street on X day. That's my schedule. Sometimes they'll say, hey, I'm going on vacation next week. Here's who I recommend, or you just defer to the next inspector in line. Most of them are good. Remember, they're certified. They've been doing this. Most of them are general contractors or in some sort of trade where they understand construction, they understand the components of a house. They could be electricians, whomever. It could be a combination of all those things. So they do know houses pretty well. And then you want to schedule it. So once the schedule is set, then fantastic. Now we're set to go, rock and roll. That is when you basically talk to your clients. Do they want to be there for the inspection? Do they want you to just represent them there at the inspection? It is very, very important that a real estate agent be there for the inspection. Some inspectors are licensed. They have their own keys. They can let themselves in. But I always basically meet the inspector out there. If it's Tuesday at 10 o'clock, I say, hey, Mr. Client, do you want to meet me out there Tuesday at 10 o'clock? And we'll kind of go through the house together. I make the handshake, the meeting, the greeting. They typically are paying at that point. So the client is writing a check for $400 or $350, whatever the inspection is going to be, to the inspector. And they get to know each other a little bit. So we're all there. We're all happy. Let's begin the inspection. I usually will walk around with the inspector and the client for an hour or so, but if it is going to be a bigger house, a 300, 1,000 to anything above that, it could be a larger house, it's just more square footage. It could have 2 furnaces, just a real complicated roof or plumbing system or radiant heat or something like that. So it could take longer. Sometimes I'll even go for a little errand, and as long as they're there and they're comfortable, that's fine. Technically, you should be there for the inspection, so I don't encourage you to leave, but oftentimes I will pull out a laptop and do work while they're doing their inspection. I want to make sure that I'm as productive as possible, and quite honestly, I don't want to get up on the roof and start poking around. That's their job. And they will do just that. So while we're waiting, a lot of times the client will be there for an hour. They'll walk around to the furnace. They'll start showing which switches are which, shut-off valve for the water, gas lines, breaker box, maybe poke around on a deck. And a lot of times they stick screwdrivers into rotten wood and show them where the wood is rotten. They'll look for mold. And then, the more technical stuff as they get into the polarity of the electricity, the chimney, mortar, stuff like that. A lot of times clients will just leave after that, or they'll stick around for the whole thing. It's up to them. But I typically will bring a laptop as well and start doing a little bit of work on my phone, make some phone calls, stuff like that. I've seen enough inspections that I don't need to poke around like they do. And that is what they do. So let's go into really what the inspector is looking for. They're going to look at the outside of the house. They're going to look at the siding, the windows. They're going to look at the roof. They're going to look at the chimney and the mortar work. They're going to inspect the electrical system. They're going to look at the breaker box. Some breaker boxes are very old. We've got fuse systems out there. They might say, hey, this could be a problem. It's worked in the past, but if you are going to put in a new kitchen with big appliances, something like that, this is not going to be a fuse box that's going to support that kind of electricity. So you'll have to have the whole thing redone. They're going to, like I said, polarity. They're going to look at the outlets and make sure that they're wired properly. And they've got tools to do that. They're always looking for mold everywhere they go. They're looking for water and mold. Signs that maybe there was a flood in the past, signs that there might have been water damage from another floor, any sort of mold that might be covered up, bathrooms, things like that. They're going to check air pressure in if it's let's say it's a forced air furnace or air conditioning system. They're going to turn those on, make sure it's working. They'll inspect the furnace. They'll take a look at the water heater. And so on and so forth. They spend a couple, 3 hours in the house really poking around and looking at everything. They will look around the house, look for drainage issues. They will look at peeling paint. On that note, there are different, we'll wait for the appraisals. We'll get into different VA, FHA appraisals here in a little bit. But the inspector really is looking for anything and everything that could be a problem. They'll look in the bathrooms and the kitchen under the sinks to make sure there's no water damage, make sure there's no leaks, leaky faucets, things like that. And the inspector is the eyes and the ears of the client. They're the person that is out there representing the client, making sure that they as a professional give their valued opinion that this house is a good purchase. And again, some people don't care. Some people are just like, look, I can self-inspect. I'm a general contractor. I know what I'm looking for. I don't want to pay $400 or $500 for this inspection. Other people might be flipping the house, like, hey, we're going to gut it. We're going to tear everything out. We're going to rebuild it, put it back together. We don't need an inspection. Great. I mean, again, make sure that they understand we advise that they do get one, and if they refuse, then try to get that in writing. So the inspector basically is paid, they've finished, they've poked around, then they create a report. And most of them are pretty good at getting that report back within 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. That's usually the outside. They oftentimes will be working at night on their computers putting the inspection report together. They poke around during the day, do computer work at night. And the inspection report is effectively 20 or so pages. It's a picture of the house. They'll take pictures, digital pictures of all the different areas that they inspected, and especially where there's a problem. So if they say, okay, we see black mold in a corner of a bathroom, they'll take a picture of it. If they see a rotted beam underneath a deck and they've got a screwdriver poked into the rotted wood 3 inches, they typically will take a picture of that. So any problems that they see, they take pictures of, and then in this report, it's just this long list of different items that they inspected. And a lot of them, they'll say, okay, and the reports themselves are a little bit generic. So is the roof going to last more than 10 years? Yes. Is the electrical system in good shape? Yes. And then they'll make notes on the bottom if something is bad. Electrical system is fine, but outlet in master bedroom, the polarity is reversed. That needs to be fixed. And under the electrical section, face covers, face plates are not on electrical boxes or junction boxes down in the basement laundry room. Whatever it's going to be, they'll make note of that. Sometimes you see those sinks are a little bit leaky, the faucets leak. And they say, well, okay, we've got, the second bathroom, the second sink in that bathroom has got a little bit of a leak and we see rust, and that should be fixed. If it's critical, definitely they'll call it out. They go downstairs and they're like, hey, there was a flood down here, there's water damage, there's mold everywhere. These are big red flags. Sometimes they call out that roof and they're like, hey, the roof probably won't last more than another year. It's really, really, really bad. And that stinks because most people are not going to replace a roof. Sometimes they will, but that's a big, big item that you got to kind of figure out. So you get that report, and that report gives us a whole list of different things, and every house has something wrong with it. Even a new house has got little things wrong with it, and we have to kind of go through there and determine with our client what we want fixed or replaced, or if we want anything fixed or replaced. They can also just walk away. They can say, you know what, I don't like this house. There's too many things wrong with it. I don't even want to ask you to fix stuff. I'm just done. And then the contract terminates. So they have that right to do that. On that note, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Washington State really had to dive into this a couple of years ago because they had people who they would self-inspect, and they would say, you know what, I don't like this. I have buyer's remorse. I just don't want to buy this house anymore. And the listing agent would say, well, you can't do that. You didn't have a professional inspector inspect it, so your personal inspection is not good enough. Well, that listing agent was wrong. So the state of Washington made it very clear through, of course, litigation and court cases went through the system. They made it very clear that an individual can self-inspect, and if they're within that period of time, whether it be 10 days in Washington, 7 days in Idaho, whatever time frame they've allotted themselves, they decide that they don't like the cherry tree out front. They don't like the neighborhood. They can say, nope, I'm done. And that stands as an inspection, and they may void the contract based on that inspection. So don't make that mistake of saying, hey, it's got to be a professional that inspects. That's something you would want if you really truly want to go through with it, and you're not that handy. I mean, it is good to have that those professional eyes and ears on the house. So they give you this report, and you have some options now. What do you want to do? Do you want to ask the seller to replace a bunch of stuff? Well, yeah, but this is where the art form comes in. So, there's a little bit of art and science, and so this is the art part of it, where you go, okay, we're in Seattle. This is 2017 in the summer. We got our offer accepted, and there were 5 offers on this house. We beat everyone out. We know they're hungry for this house. What do we want to ask for? So you have to be really careful with that. You don't want to say, hey, we want a new roof, we want new plumbing, we want you to replace the sewer line. I mean, you start racking up these $5,000 and $10,000 bills, they're just not going to do it. They're going to go on to the next person and say, hey, do you want the house? And so be very careful. But at the same time, we don't want our clients to just buy a house that has all these problems, and then they're stuck with these problems. So we really got to kind of take a deep breath, sit down, and look at the inspection report and determine what's important and what's not. And to me, the most important factor is safety factors. Is there something there that is going to cause a hazard? If there's a bunch of black mold in the basement, I mean, that's a safety hazard. That can cause serious illness. If the electrical panel was redone a few years ago and it was done by an amateur and the wiring is screwed up, that's a problem. Now, it could be an old Zinsco panel that has been recalled and had issues, and sometimes you can't even finance if you've got one of those panels, but we'll save that for the appraisals. There's a lot of big issues that could be hazardous, and that's the stuff we want to basically say, hey, you've got to fix this. And sometimes, sometimes there's a balance. So if you're in this very expensive market and this heated market in Seattle, Portland, Coeur d'Alene, we see it here in Spokane now too. So if you're in that really heated market, you might be able to. Now, I'm not saying do this all the time, but you might be able to jack the price up just a little bit. So let's say they are going to do $5,000 worth of work and you're at $375. Well, you might be able to jack the price up to $380, and then the seller will basically do that $5,000 worth of work. And it still might be financeable depending on where the appraisal comes in. It's a pretty sophisticated way to deal with this, but sometimes we have to get sophisticated because it's a very hot market. So determine what's most important in that inspection report that's a hazard, if it's a health hazard. Sure, if the roof has got 1 year left and it's going to cost $20,000 to put on a new roof and your client just doesn't have the money, the seller's not going to replace it, you're probably going to lose the deal. Or if they just don't have the money and you have no option, then you want to ask the seller to replace the roof and see what happens. So, and sometimes there's work that you can do yourself. You might be pretty handy, and they're okay with going up and tucking and pointing new mortar into a couple joints that are up on the chimney. That's not too hard. A lot of weekend warriors can do that. It could be, they might find some paint issues, and it's like, okay, well, once I buy the house, I get it. I'll scrape off the bad paint and I'll repaint it. Maybe they are an electrician. They're like, you know what, I'm okay with the panel box being like it is. I can replace that anyway. So we want to make sure that we don't kill the deal. That's the point of it. It's a balance. I mean, if you ask them for just a ton of stuff, usually that'll kill the deal. The seller's going to say, no, I'm done. I don't want to do any of that stuff. So in Washington, there's the inspection response form. So you basically, on that form, you're saying, I want you to do X number of work to this property. You can also just say, I don't want the property, and check that box. There's 4 boxes you can check. So the inspection response form is something you want to get back to the seller within that time frame. So if you have 10 days to respond, you want to make sure you get it back there within 10 days. So if there is a big issue, it's usually best to talk about it with the listing agent. I've always found that communication works best. Say, hey, our inspector was out there. I've emailed you a copy of the inspection report so they know that you're not making it up. but I want to go over this issue down in the basement. It looks like there was a flood. There was a bunch of water damage down there. They cleaned it up, but I just want to talk about that. And it might require a sump pump, might require, you know, some other solution. In that inspection, there's a lot of individual inspections they can do. They can do a radon inspection. So here in Spokane, we've got radon issues, and radon's a funny thing. It's a colorless, odorless, natural gas that occurs in pockets. So you can have a house that's, you know, radon free over here, and right next door you've got one that's got real high levels of radon because of that pocket of radon. And it causes lung cancer. It's a bad gas. It's a nasty, silent killer. So they might want to do an extra inspection, a radon inspection, and that's fine. And the same deal, the radon inspector or the inspector has radon equipment. Typically that's the case. You pay a little bit extra for them to put their radon equipment in there, and they come back 24 hours later and measure, take that measurement. And if it's really high, then like anything else in the inspection, you address that. Say there's real high levels of radon here. Can you put a radon mitigation system in there that costs roughly $3,000? And the seller might say, well,
it happens twice.
Does it have, what's the question?
Oh, I had that happen to me twice with the radon. It was about $3,000.
Yeah. I mean, I've had it happen a bunch too. It's a prudent thing to do if there is radon in that area. Some areas just don't have radon, so you might not need to do it. But here in Spokane, we have it. So I always advise my clients get a radon inspection in addition. It might cost an extra $50 to $100, something like that. And so there's a way to mitigate it. You dig a hole, and where the radon's seeping up from underneath, that hole vents out the radon through a venting system. You know, just a fan and out to the outside and into the world, so everyone can enjoy your radon. But the mitigation system's roughly $3,000, and it usually has to be done. I mean, you know, you don't want to move into a house and you got a bunch of kids and you've got radon that causes cancer. I mean, that's not good. So, radon mitigation system. There is also a sewer inspection. That's another one that's very, very common. I do encourage my clients, especially if it's an older house. If it's a newer house, not too big of a worry, but if it's an older house, they used to use these clay tiles, and they would fit them together, and they would kind of line them up, and usually about 18-foot section, or I'm sorry, 18-inch sections. And they would fit them together, and they would go off to the street and hook up with the sewer line. Well, yeah, great. They worked really well in 1938. But guess what? It's clay. It's been 70 years, 80 years, and that stuff deteriorates. So a sewer inspection is basically, you know, these specialists come out, and they've got these long kind of snakes with a camera at the end. And they can go out 100, 200 feet. So they want to basically go in through the washout, through the clean out, and they want to go all the way out to the sewer. And it's pretty funky. If you haven't seen it before, it's you know, you're going through this pipe, and you know, you see a little bit of water down there and effluent and whatever else, you know, we're flushing out into the sewer system, but not a lot. It's usually more water. It's not as nasty as you might think, but it's usually just kind of an empty pipe, and they're snaking right through that, and you kind of see the sections of those tiles, and there's roots that'll come through. Some
Muted.
Let me get okay, so hopefully you can hear me again. I saw that I got muted there for a second. So in that sewer inspection, you can see the roots, you can see all this stuff coming into the this tunnel. And modern
Muted. Unmuted.
There we go. I don't know why I keep getting muted. I will keep unmuting me. So you basically you're looking for root problems. You're looking for collapsed tiles. You're looking for these issues that you know, that those clay tiles.
Muted.
Okay.
Unmuted.
This is getting goofy. So sorry, can you guys on the chat room, can you tell me, am I getting muted? And it seems like just for a couple seconds, I'm getting a note that says self-muting, and I'm not touching anything. I'm just talking. Can you look into that or let me know, Alex, if I'm being muted out? Okay. So let's get back into that sewer inspection. So the sewer line is basically, you know, it's got problems with it. It's collapsed tiles. It's got roots. You basically are going to have to replace it. Well, that's, you know, that's a big deal. You gotta dig down 10 feet maybe. You got to trench it out. You got to put in modern equipment. So there's a lot you have to do to really replace that sewer line, and it could be 100 feet. It could be 200 feet. It could be a long way to the street sewer line. So this is a $10,000 type project, and that's an important inspection to have as well. You can have other specialists in there. You can have electrical inspectors. You have plumbing.
Muted. Unmuted.
This is getting really annoying. I just got muted again. Okay, thanks, Donna, for letting me know. I'm just going to try to bear through it. Hold on a second. I'm going to make sure that my phone is not using internet. That's one of the things I normally do, but I did not do today. Okay, turning the Wi-Fi off there, and hopefully that helps a little bit. So it's all digital, and we've got a lot of computers in the office running off of one system, so it puts pressure on the system. And again, like other weeks, I apologize to everyone. I itch my nose a lot, my mustache. Allergies are driving me crazy, but I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel, not the sewer tunnel, the proverbial allergy tunnel. So we've got these special inspections that we can do. And you know, that's pretty thorough. If you're doing an electrical inspection, a radon test, a sewer inspection, a plumbing inspection, you could have a roofer out there to do a roof certification. So the roof might be, you know, like, God, this roof looks pretty shabby. Well, a roofer can get out there and do a certification and say, I certify this for 3 years, for 5 years, for 10 years. And sometimes you have to.
Muted. Unmuted.
Sometimes a
Muted. Unmuted.
I can. I was cutting out there for a minute, so I don't know. I shut some stuff down.
Okay,
on my end.
Hopefully, we got some technical issues with the muting. So let's see what happens with this. So it just keeps going out.
I can hear you now better.
Yeah, and I don't know why it is. Okay, roof certification. So they might certify the roof for you know, many years, and that's great. But they also might come back and they say, hey, you know, I can't certify this thing. It's got to be replaced. Well, that's another thing. We have to go, a big ticket item, we have to go back to the seller with and say, hey, you know, we need this roof replaced. Once you ask.
Muted. Unmuted.
Okay, this is bad. I'm saying I'm being muted by an organizer. So Alex, will you make sure that we're the only two that have control of this? So make sure that I am not being muted by you, because I'm not touching anything.
Unless I accidentally hit it.
Be careful.
I'm just cutting out a lot. Like you were out there for about, like, nothing was working on my end for about 4 minutes. So I'll watch it closer.
Yeah, watch it closer.
Watch it.
Unless we want.
Yeah, I had to restart my machine. So.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Is Marissa back there? She's not back there yet, is she? I wonder if we shouldn't turn off.
No, there was a few people in the bullpen, but.
Okay. Well, we're going to cut this section out of our when we edit, but hopefully it stops doing this. So I apologize for it. It's technology that's out of my hands. kind of sometimes like inspections. So back to the the sellers. So you're going back to these sellers and you're asking for a big ticket item like replace the roof or replace the sewer line or put a radon mitigation system in there. And they're inclined to say no. So you got to come up with creative solutions. One of those solutions is jacking the price up a little bit and asking them to do it. Sometimes they don't have the money to do it. They're like, look, I don't have any money either. I can't make that fix. So in that case, typically you can do what we call an escrow holdback. So they make their money, they're making $100,000 on the deal, the roofing's going to be $10,000. Well, escrow cuts them a check for $90,000 and they hold back $10,000 that is doled out to a roofer. And then the roofer can start the job at a later date. Right now in June, if we hire a roofer, well, they're not going to start for probably months. I mean, this is the busy time of the year. So they can hold that money for a while and then pay it off to the roofer through the proceeds. And that's called an escrow holdback. So if you need to do something like that, let me know. Some lenders do it, some lenders don't. So you just have to have the right lender that will do that. That's one way to mitigate it. I've seen as much. We had this week with one of our agents had to kick in. It was a big deal. It was about a $15,000 commission. Well, he ended up kicking in $5,000 to help with the new roof. And his choices were A and B. A was to kick in $5,000 and make $10,000 on the deal. Or B, everyone was walking away. And they were pretty serious about walking away. And he's like, I'd rather have $10,000 than nothing. And so that was the solution he came up with. It stinks, but again, at our commission structure, it's palatable. It is something that can be done and oftentimes has to be done. So there's different ways to kind of help the seller cross that bridge and help the buyers cross that bridge. Sometimes everybody kicks in. Sometimes the seller's like, hey, I'll do $3,300. The buyer's like, well, I'm the one getting the new 30-year roof, so I'll kick in $3,300. And the agents together kick in $3,300, and bam, you've got your $10,000. So there's creative ways to get this stuff done, and for those big ticket safety items, it's got to be done. It's something that's been neglected, and typically you want the seller to do it because they're the ones that neglected it. They're the ones that waited 29 and a half years on their 30-year roof to replace it, or they're the ones that never even thought about their sewer lines and didn't care about the toilets backing up because they had a bunch of roots down there that have broken the line. So they're the ones that deferred their maintenance on the house, and they should be the ones that pay for it. But those of us that have been in the industry for a while, sellers become very obstinate, and especially in this market, a seller's market, they're like, I don't care. I'll move on to the next buyer. Let them pay for it. So it is best to talk to the agent first and say, hey, we found this in the inspection report. What do you think we should do? That other agent, remember, they've got a $15,000 commission. Well, at their company, they only get $10,000 of it, but they've got a big commission waiting for them as well. And they don't want the deal to die. They want to, we're 2 weeks from close. We want to get this thing done. We want to keep it moving forward. What can we do to put our heads together and solve this problem? So communicating with the other agent, I think, is really key. It does help, and then you can then you just have to gently break it to the seller, and you break it to them with that inspection response form, saying, hey, we did an inspection. The inspection had 30 items to fix, and we're only asking you to fix 4 of them. But they're health issues. They have to be fixed. And oftentimes a seller is like, okay, I get it. It's deferred maintenance. I'm going to make $200,000 on the sale. It's not going to kill me to spend $5,000 to fix these problems. So a lot of times they get that. And it's always better to ask, and see what happens. Sometimes a real hot market, again, like Seattle right now, you can't ask them for anything. It's just like, look, fine, we're not going to ask for anything. We're going to buy it. We know what the problems are now. We'll fix it after we close. We'll knock them off one by one, and we'll pay for it. So again, it's more art than science. This is part of the negotiating process. It's that inspection report's really important, though, because then you know what they're dealing with. Even if they're going to fix it themselves, they've got a laundry list of items that they can do. So very important report to get. Okay, any questions so far? Chat room looks pretty clean. Donna, you're the only one that has chatted so far, so thank you. There's other inspections you can get. I didn't mention the pest inspection. A lot of times a pest inspection is really important, especially if you see ants, you see bugs, you see holes in the foundation or in the roof or something like that. I mean, sometimes you want to say, hey, let's do an extra inspection. You might see it later on, and then you can ask for additional days to do that additional inspection. So be mindful of what that house might need. Again, if it's an old house, a sewer inspection, radon areas, a radon inspection. You see, a stack of wood next to the house and a bunch of ants around it. Are those carpenter ants? Could they have infested the house? Maybe you see them inside, things like that. So additional inspections are really important. Okay. And then once you go back and forth, just to finish on inspections, once you go back and forth with the seller and the buyer and the seller and the buyer, you can kind of get there. Sometimes an important component, the seller will say, no, I'm not going to do any of these inspections, we're done. Or not the inspections, I'm sorry. Any of these items, inspection items you're asking me to fix, I'm not going to do them, we're done. That's not necessarily the case. You have the chance now to determine, okay, I've got the buyer in this case. The seller's not going to repair any of these things. We go ahead and waive those, and we're going to continue with the contract, and we're waiving the inspection basically at this point because seller's not going to fix them, and we don't care. We still want to buy the house. It's not a reason for the seller to get out of the contract. The buyer can get out of the contract anytime within that inspection period. So I've seen that many, many times before where the seller's like, oh, they're asking me to replace the roof. I'm not going to do that. I want out of this because they think they've got a better offer behind in second position. They can't just kill the contract at that point. The buyer they have the right to determine that, okay, fine, you're not going to fix the roof. We don't want the roof fixed. Let's continue on. So that is that's an important piece of it. All right, Brian has a question here. I just wanted to comment that many of the roofing companies in Seattle market will not stop doing roof certifications a few years back. Yeah, I realize that. And roof certifications can be difficult. A lot of them they don't want to take the time. They're very, very busy. My guess is that if they weren't as busy, if the market wasn't as hot right now, and people putting as much money into these roofs, that they would be more than happy to do a roof certification. So it's all about the money. They've got a $20,000 roofing job. They've got 20 of them lined up. They don't want to go make $70 to go look at a roof. They just don't have time. And again, especially this time of year where they're up at dawn and they're working into the night. So roof certification can be a problem. And we'll get more into that when we get into appraisals because sometimes you have to have a roof certification. And that can be a real conundrum if they're not going to do them. So cool. Thanks, Brian. Okay, sip the tea. Let's check the time. The muting problem seems to have worked itself out. So that's good. Appraisals. Okay. So appraisals are, let's say the inspection's finished. You've done a response. Everything's fine. Seller's going to fix, they're going to fix a couple items. Buyer's cool with that. Everyone's good to go. Within that 10-day period, it's all been taken care of. Now you know you're moving forward. And that's why it's so important to get that inspection done right away because you want to get the appraisal ordered as soon as possible. But you don't want to have the buyer pay for an appraisal and pay for an inspection and find out during the inspection process that no, they're not going to go forward with this deal. Now they've just paid $500 for an appraisal and they're not going to use it basically. So Again, when it's me, I try to get that inspection done within a few days, try to get the whole thing ironed out within a few days while the seller, or I'm sorry, while the buyer is making an application for their loan, while they're getting their financial documents together, all that stuff. And that makes it a lot easier to come back, let's say 5 days later, you've got the inspection, you've ironed all the inspection response items out, everyone's on the same page, so to speak. They know what they're going to do and they're going to move forward. You're 5 days out and now the loan is with the underwriter, it's all set up with the lender, and you can go ahead and order the appraisal. Okay, so we're all moving forward. It's a week later. Fantastic. Let's order that appraisal. Again, the appraisal happens through the lender. And as the inspection is the biggest part, after we sign around the purchase and sale agreement, the inspection, the response, all of that is the biggest part that the real estate agent's going to do from this point forward. Most of the transaction now is really in the lender's hands. There's so much that the lender's doing. The loan officer should be the maestro, so to speak, organizing a lot of different parties, making sure that they're in touch with Escrow, that they've got a copy of the title report, that they've got a copy of the purchase and sale agreement. They get all these financial documents. They order the appraisal. They coordinate with the appraisal management company. There's a whole bunch of stuff that the lender is doing. So be sure to stay in touch with the lender. Stay in close communication with them. That's one of the keys to a successful transaction at that point. But at that point, the lender's ordering the appraisal. So they're basically saying, okay, Mr. Buyer, now we need a credit card for $500. We are going to order it through an appraisal management company. Again, due to the DoddFrank bill of 2010, the financial reform regulations, loan officers can't just pick up the phone. Got one right here. Pick up the phone and say, hey, Mr. Appraiser, why don't you get out there? We're good buddies. We have beers. Get me a good appraisal, and then we will go ahead and do more business in the future if you get me that valuation that I want. The Dodd-Frank bill didn't like those cozy relationships, so they said, no more. You can't do that. You have to order the appraisal through an appraisal management company, and they're going to assign the appraisal blindly to an appraiser out there that you have no contact with. So it is like a no contact order. It's almost like a restraining order in some ways. I mean, the lender just can't have contact with the appraiser. Now, important note, the real estate agent can have contact with the appraiser. So again, working closely with the lender and the loan officer and saying, who's the appraiser? Oh, we don't know, but it's been assigned to someone at this appraisal management company, and they're doing the appraisal Thursday at 4 p.m. You can go out and meet that appraiser. You can go out there and have a relationship. Say, hey, I'm the real estate agent. You know, what's your name? And great, good to meet you. And do you mind if I just kind of hang out here? The reason is, it's annoying, but the reason to do that is that now you have the ability to slightly, I'll say, communicate with the appraiser. I would never say manipulate, because that would be illegal. But you have the ability to communicate with the appraiser and try to understand their valuation, and perhaps maybe put a little bit of emphasis, not pressure, but emphasis that, you know, you need X amount of value to make this deal work. And so that's one of the little tricks of the trade. And I lots of quotes, and you guys get my meaning. It's because I am a licensed loan officer. I don't want to encourage anybody to influence an appraiser. But to me, it's more communication. Having good communication with the appraiser is important, because appraisers have gotten lazy. The jobs come to them easy. I mean, I've seen appraisers recently call radiant heat, you know, gas forced air. I've seen them, you know, just absolutely miss on the appraisal. They're saying the house is 2,500 square feet and it's 3,500 square feet. They're really lazy right now because they're not beholden to anyone. So that's the downside of this appraisal management company part of it. They're also more expensive. We used to do appraisals a few years back for $300, $350. Now we're seeing them at $700. Well, guess what? There's a lot of middlemen now, and they all have to get their wheels greased. So as you can probably sense from my voice, I'm not a big fan of the Dodd-Frank bill. I get that there needed to be some financial reform, but this went too far. And like most legislators, they didn't know what the results would be. They just knew that there was a witch hunt and they had to participate to satisfy their constituents. So the appraisal management companies were set up because of that. Now, what you're doing with the appraisal is, you're basically letting the lender assign the appraiser. It depends on the loan type, so they'll assign it to a VA certified appraiser, an FHA certified appraiser, or just an appraiser that's qualified to do conventional conforming loans. They all have to have different designations and certifications. They're similar though. The VA and FHA USDA appraiser, they have to do, they've got to do a little bit extra. Not a whole lot extra, but basically they've got to look for a few more items. So the house has to be in good functioning order. And there can't be any peeling paint. There can't be, there has to be a cooking unit working. So a range and a stove top that's working. There can't be any mold, obviously. Everything has to be working, no cracked windows. So a lot of times they're calling out a little bit of peeling paint on a windowsill or a cracked window, or it could even be peeling paint on a garage, just an old dilapidated garage, and someone repainted the whole house, but they didn't repaint the garage, and they can call that out. So the appraiser is out there, and they're the eyes and the ears of the lender. Remember, the inspector is the eyes and the ears of the buyer. Now the lender, who might be in Texas or New York or wherever, they're going, hey, what's the valuation of this house? We don't know, and we're about to lend a bunch of money on it, so we need your professional opinion on this. And again, there's a lot of art to it. It's not just science, and it's just kind of an opinion. And so they go out and they'll measure the rooms. They will, look at the heating system. They'll make sure everything's working. They'll look at the kitchen. They'll examine the exterior, look for peeling paint. They'll look for any sort of major defects. The inspector is going to find the minor defects. An appraiser is going to look for the major defects. They'll take their camera and they'll put it up in a crawl space, and they'll take photos in different directions. See if there's mold up there, see if it's insulated, see if there's old wiring. Like sometimes there's the knob and tube wiring up there that's loose, and that could still be hooked up to a power source, and all of a sudden, there's a spark, and boom, the whole house blows up. So they're looking for some major safety issues as well. And then when they go back, and then appraisers, we know that inspectors take 2 or 3 hours. Appraisers can take less than 15 minutes. They make some measurements. Good appraisers take at least a half an hour. They make some of those measurements, and then they jot down notes and everything, and they take their pictures, and then the picture of the outside, and then they leave. And once they leave, then they go home to their computer, and they've got an appraisal form that they fill out. And the appraisal valuation, they're using the same information that we all have access to. So we've all got access to the MLS, and that's what they dive right into. There's some federal rules to these appraisals, and this is what the lender's looking for. So the lender's often looking, they want to find the most complete comps, so comparable properties to the property, the subject property, we'll call it. And these comps, they vary. I mean, no two houses are exactly the same, and some are pretty darn close, but no two houses are exactly the same. And so they're looking for, they take a radius search. So in every MLS, you can see the little circle, and so you pinpoint a dot, and then you pull it out a mile. So if they're in a city, the rule goes basically a mile out, and then 6 months back for sales. So, and that's why they can put in there sold, and they can put a date on it 6 months back. And this is stuff you want to do when you're evaluating a property and doing a valuation of that property. So the radius search, 6 months back, and then they start putting in their other parameters. So if it's a 1953 house, well, that's not going to be similar to a 1940s house, nor is it going to be similar to something in the 70s. So, you know, pretty much that decade or so. They'll try to go 1950 to 1959. Bathrooms are really important to them. Bedrooms, not quite as much. So they want to get within one on the bedrooms, and they want to get identical to the bathrooms. They also, on fireplaces, they want to make sure that they're close there. If there's, you know, if the comp has no fireplaces and the subject property has 3 fireplaces, that's not a good comp. So they want to, you know, if your subject property's got 2 fireplaces and the comps have 1, that's fine, or 3, that's fine. Anything close enough. But so within that date, then they look at style. You know, they don't want to compare a craftsman to a rancher. They want to look at the style. They want to look at square footage. They look at assessed square footage, and then they look at the actual square footage that they measured. They look at the tax records. They look at, you know, these taxes, the subject properties at $3,000 a year, and all these other comparable properties are at $2,000 a year or $5,000 a year. They're not close enough. So what's the difference? What are they seeing? Some comps might be in this quiet little neighborhood, and then you've got one that's almost a mile away that's over by a freeway or a major road. It's on an arterial or busy road. So they want to make sure that the comps, they should anyway, make sure that the comps are truly comparable properties. They'll look at properties that are sold. Technically, they want to do properties sold within the last 6 months, but they'll look at stuff under contract. And sometimes they'll call up the agent and say, hey, what's going to be the purchase price of that contract? Or something that is active right now on the market, so that the lender can see, hey, there's 4 properties that sold, but here's 2 properties that are still active on the market or pending that look like pretty good comps as well. And then they'll make their determination of value. They'll say, okay, the subject matter, they have a purchase price of $350,000. We've got 4 comps that sold at $350 to $358, and we believe the subject property is $350. Sometimes agents get a little wigged out because the comps are, let's say, are all above $350, and the purchase price of the subject property is $350. So let's say they're all $358. And the agent's going, well, why isn't our value at $358? Most of the times on a purchase, the appraiser is just trying to get value. They're just trying to get up to the value needed to keep this deal moving forward. And so if they can just get $350 and say it's worth $350, great. But if you look at the comps, you can basically determine with your client that, hey, all these comps are $358. You probably have $8,000 immediately in equity in your house. So you've got a pretty good deal here. Conversely, it can go the other way. And we're seeing that a lot. Seattle, Portland, here in Spokane, we're seeing it. Boise, I know, is seeing it, and Coeur d'Alene is seeing it. Tri-Cities is seeing it. You know, we're seeing a lot of undervaluations. And the reason is when they go back 6 months, they're not able to keep up with these rising and rapidly rising prices. So $350 is the agreed upon price. The buyer's more than happy to pay $350. It's a hot market. They want the house. Well, the appraiser goes back 6 months and they find a bunch of properties worth $340. And they're like, hey, $340 is the price that we think this thing should be valued. So you're $10,000 low. That sucks. Okay, technical term, Alex, sucks. It can throw a real wrench into this machine. So now you've got, okay, we're $10,000 shy of where we need to be to make this purchase happen in the financing. So a couple things can happen. So you basically are doing a notice of low appraisal to the seller. And you're saying, hey, the appraisal came in low. Will you match this $340? Sometimes they will. In a buyer's market, certainly they'll go, okay, well, we get it. In a seller's market, like especially a hot one like this right now, they're going to say, I don't think so. I'm going to go ahead and sell it for $350. I'm going to wait for a cash buyer. Or what we're seeing in the hot market is cash to close to make up that difference. So, for example, they agreed to, let's say, a $350 sales price, but they'll pay up to $11,000 difference between the appraised price and the sales price should the appraisal come in low. So the seller would still get their $350 even if the appraisal came in at $339. But now if the appraisal came in at $338 and there's only an $11,000 cash difference that they're willing to pay, then you have to go to the seller and say, hey, you know, we can't give you $350, but we can get you to $349. Is that going to work? Because the appraisal came in at $338. We have enough cash to go $11,000 more than that appraised price, but that's all the money we have. And then you let the seller make that call. They might say, well, $349 is close enough to $350. I'll go ahead with that. Sometimes it's a whole bunch difference. You know, the appraisal could come in at, and I've seen this a lot lately, appraisal comes in at $320. And you're at an agreed upon price of $350. It's like, oh, good Lord, is this really happening? Especially if you know the property's worth that. I mean, it can be really frustrating. So again, these appraisers, they're not accountable to anybody. They know that they could come in at $3, and if you complained about it, big deal. They're still going to get a whole bunch of business because the DoddFrank bill says that they can. So that's where it's really flawed, is that they're not accountable to anyone, and so they are lazy in their appraisals. They don't mind coming in low. They don't mind blowing up deals, having people cry and be angry, and they just don't care because nobody can say, hey, you did a bad job, and I'm not going to give you any business in the future. That's not where their bread is buttered. So it's hopefully the system gets a little bit more refined as we move forward, but so the appraisal comes back, and hopefully it comes in a value. So everything can move forward and there's no issues. Now, the government stuff. So FHA, a couple things on this. So if it comes in low, let's say, and it's a conventional appraisal, there's no real system for it to stay in. So the seller might say, you know what, I don't care, I'm going to put it back on the market and try to get my $350. If it's a government appraisal, there's actually a government system that these appraisers, you know, enter into. So with an FHA loan, there's a CABRS system that it gets entered in that this appraisal came in at $340, and that stays in there for 6 months. So even if the seller puts the house back on the market and he's obstinate and ignorant and won't listen, you know, to people saying, like me, when I tell them, hey, look, you put this back on the market, if someone comes along as an FHA buyer, they're going to see this appraisal, and they're not going to appraise it for any more than that. They're going to go off of this value. So if it's a government loan, it'll stay in a system for up to 6 months, and so you want to let the seller know that. They're basically eliminating FHA, VA, USDA buyers. So they have to wait for another conventional loan or a cash offer. And, you know, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. We are seeing plenty of cash offers out there, so it's possible. Now, what happens when there is peeling paint? Let's say so the house looks pretty good. It's a brick house, but they replaced all the windows, but they didn't really do the outside window sills that are wood from the 1940s, and they're peeling. Well, that's a problem. The FHA appraiser, the VA appraiser, they're going to call that out. And a lot of people don't realize this, a conventional appraiser can also call that out as a paint hazard. You know, if they think there's lead-based paint or they think there's some issue because of the age of the house, and they see something, they can call it out. They can just make a note, and a lending underwriter can say, you know what, we don't really want to do this loan. We don't like the appraisal. We don't like the house. So they can also do that on a conventional side, but they will do it on the government side. So an FHA loan, they see this peeling paint on the windowsills, well, they're going to call that out. And the lender's going to say, we are not going to lend on this property until that's fixed. Okay, now what do you do? Well, you've got a few options. You can, and I've done this before, I've actually rolled my sleeves up because, again, at the end of the rainbow in a couple weeks, there's a $10,000 commission check. I don't mind spending a couple hours just painting. for that. It's just some extra work, and unless they've only spent a few hours on the property anyway, and it's worth it to me to do that. So if it's $1,000 commission check, I probably wouldn't do it. But I always try to get at least the seller to do it and say, hey, we've got an FHA appraisal. They called out the windowsills. Can you go ahead and paint those? Now, they might say yes, they might say no. And then you just have to figure out how you're going to do it. Hire a professional painter, go out there and do it yourself if you want, if they're okay with that. Make sure you always get permission. But there's different ways. It has to be done one way or another. It has to be done. And if it's windowsills, that's pretty easy. If it's a whole house, that's a whole other issue. But windowsills, it's like, let's say it's just 5 of them. You scrape them, and then you can even put just 1 coat of primer on there, and you're done. As long as it is sealed, that's all that matters. And then when you scrape, you have to clean up the scraping. So you can't just scrape a bunch of paint off and have it fall into the hedges, and then the inspector comes out there, the appraiser comes out there to re-inspect. And they go, hey, there's a bunch of, this could be lead-based paint now that's in the soil and in these plants and all this other stuff. So you do have to clean up after yourself. So they just want to see that it's repaired. And that's called a reinspection. And it's a simple process. The biggest pain is that they go out there and it's usually an extra $100. So the appraiser is going to charge an extra $100 to go out there. There have been some appraisers in the past that have, and usually not with painting, but with, for example, the CO2 detectors. They basically call out the CO2 detectors. In Washington, there's a law that you have to have CO2 detectors on each floor. So there aren't CO2 detectors out there, but you can buy them at Home Depot or a hardware store. Packs of 2 a lot. So sometimes I go out there, and I did this recently. I just went to Home Depot, and I got a pack of 2. I plugged them in to the outlets on each floor. Then I took a picture. The light was on, the green light was on. I took a picture, and I sent the picture to the appraiser, and the appraiser was like, yeah, that's cool. That works. I don't have to come out and re-inspect. But if it's painting or something bigger, they're going to come back out, and they're going to charge you $100. And then they're going to certify that it was done, and they'll add it to their report, their appraisal report. And now the lender's okay. They can move forward with the loan because they know that the windowsills were painted and the CO2 detectors were installed and all that good stuff. So the loan is moving through, and I've seen pretty down and dirty paint jobs. It doesn't have to be pretty. A lot of people will make that mistake, and they'll say, well, I've got to paint this, so I might as well do it right and paint the whole house. That they can. That's their option. But a lot of times it's, again, a dilapidated garage. It's 100 years old, and it just needs to be rolled on. Just something to cover it so there's actually not peeling paint sticking out. It can be ugly, it could be whatever, but that's not what they're looking for. They're just looking for it to be sealed. And that's why a lot of times I tell people, let's just put a coat of Kills on there or primer, and that way it satisfies the appraiser for this transaction. And after close, now you've got primer on there, and you can paint it whatever color you want and really take your time and do a good job and all that good stuff. So there's different ways around it, but ultimately you got to get it done. If the appraiser calls it out, it's got to be done. Appraisal timelines. I mean, this is driving me crazy. And any of you in Portland right now, you know what I'm talking about. Portland's got a real problem with VA appraisers. There's very few of them. And every market's got very few VA appraisers, but it should never be so bad that it takes 6 weeks to get an appraiser out there. And that was the case in Portland. I think it's getting a little bit better, but VA appraisers are hard to come by. They don't, they're not readily available. They're very busy. And part of the problem is that the appraisal certification process, and again, God bless the DoddFrank bill. The DoddFrank bill requires up to 2,500 hours of appraisal work and schooling and education and hours before you can become an appraiser. I mean, that's like 2 years of full-time study. It's just ridiculous. Doing an appraisal is not that complicated. It can be taught in 25 hours. And that's what it used to be. Just, you do some hours, you take a class, and you become an appraiser, and you kind of learn, maybe do an apprenticeship and learn a few tricks of the trade, and bam, you're all set. So there are almost no new appraisers coming on the market because it is so awful to get your appraiser's license. Hopefully that changes. But, the government in their wisdom has overdone it on all of these qualifications because they want to make sure they're protecting the public. Those are the voters. So it's overkill. 2,500 hours to become an appraiser is ridiculous. But so there's a shortage, and then we have to wait. So always communicate that with the other agent involved, because you're like, hey, we really want to close this thing in 30 days, but we can't get an appraiser out there for 6 weeks. I'm sorry. Do an extension. And just play that as it goes. So don't just remember these dates are fluid, and this is the part of the process that is very fluid. So you don't want to set your sights or make promises that you can't keep when it's out of your hands. And so if you do a VA deal, remember that. If you do an FHA deal, remember that. Maybe give yourself 60 days to close or sooner, 60 days or sooner. So maybe it does close in 30 days, but at least you don't have to do an extension in 60 days or sooner. If it's just a conventional loan, everyone can do conventional appraisals, so those typically take a week or two, and that's not too big a deal. I tell you, my mustache, I got to trim my mustache because it is itchy me. So, no, Alex, I'm not picking my nose. I am itching my mustache and the allergies. So, sure, yeah, I get it. Yeah, got to trim this sucker. Okay, so timelines, we've kind of talked about that. Does anybody have any questions now about appraisals? Nope. Okay. If you do, go ahead and type them in and we'll get to them. So I touched on doing our own valuations, and when you do your own valuation, that's really what you're doing. You want to match the appraiser's value. And sometimes we can get delusional about value. I mean, I've got it right now. I've got 3 listings right now, and the people are out of their minds. I'm like, one of them, I absolutely fundamentally know this house is worth 308, and they're like, nope, we want 350. So at least what I'm doing is telling them that, okay, great, I'll list it for 350, but I want you to know I am positive it's worth 308. And that's where we're going to come in. And so now we've gone through the first week of the listing, and people are telling me that, oh, it's too high. It needs a lot of deferred maintenance, a 90-year-old client who hasn't lived in it in 20 years. I mean, there's deferred maintenance everywhere. So we'll see. And then at least I've set the expectations that after 2 weeks, let's lower the price. Let's get it down to 330, see what happens, and ultimately we'll get an offer at 308. And this 90-year-old gentleman, this neighbor of mine, he's fine with 308. So it's his investment banker son in New York that wants 350. But anyway, buyers and sellers get kind of crazy. They really do. And valuations are difficult. So when you want to get a listing, of course, we all want to get listings. But when the value is difficult to come by, it makes it for a really tough sale, because you want to be honest with your clients. Yes, of course I want the listing, and of course at 308 and 3%, I want a $9,000 plus commission. But it's dishonest for me to tell them 350, and the other agent was telling them, yeah, I can get 350. So this is an old, very simple sales tactic. Jack up that price, tell the seller what they want to hear. You betcha, sir, I can get 350. I'm so good. I'm gonna market this thing, and we're gonna get 350, and no problems there. And of course, they pick that agent to list their house, and then the pain starts. Then, well, we're not getting showings, and I'm getting feedback that it's priced too high. But you told me. But this is the feedback, and that's part of their MO, is going with that feedback and ratcheting that price down so that yes, it does end up selling at 308. And everyone's mad. I I lose a lot of deals. I don't do as many as I used to, but I would lose deals by being honest. And I would tell people, I'm like, look, they're just telling you that price because they want your listing, but there will be pain. And a lot of times they did come back to me. They said, you know, that agent was awful, and they told us exactly what we wanted to hear, and you were right, and we want to list the house with you. Great. This case, the one I have with the old neighbor, he just appreciated the honesty right up front and just said, well, will you at least list what they're quoting, and then we'll ratchet the price down. I said, sure, I'll do that as long as you understand that I think it's 308. How did I come to 308? Well, again, more art than science, but there is a little science to it, a little methodology. Now, you can do your CMAs, your comparative market analysis in the MLS, and they're good. They're good. I do it a little bit differently. I kind of do my own custom valuations. So what I do is I start with a couple things. Unfortunately, we live in this world of Zillow, and so everyone's going to Zillow. So I'm like, okay, let's see what people are going to see on Zillow. So pretty easy to look up a house, and there's Zestimates. Says actually on this house it was 314 was their Zestimate on the house that I thought was 308. So I'm like, okay, if I price it close to that, at least if some knucklehead comes along and they're like, hey, you know, it's priced near that Zillow estimate, then I feel like I'm getting a fair deal. Zillow's so inaccurate because their algorithm can't take into account, you know, work done or deferred maintenance, work not done to the house. It can't take into account neighborhoods. I mean, you know, we'll use Seattle as an example. You know, there's houses overlooking the Puget Sound that are worth millions and millions of dollars, but you go in just a few blocks, let's say over in Ballard or you know, Richmond Beach or something like that. You go in a few blocks, and those houses typically average $500,000. Zillow can't determine where that boundary is for the really expensive houses and what that view value is going to be. So Zillow is just so inaccurate. But the problem is, and why I use it, is because the public uses it. And so if the public's going to use it, I want to know what they're looking at. So that's one. And then two, I go to county records. So I say, okay, Mr. Neighbor, you want to list this at 350. Zestimate, the Zillow estimate says 314. And then I look in county records, the assessor's office, and go online, and the assessor's office says, well, tax rolls show $3,300 a year. Well, there's a house comparably priced at, you know, $329 down the street, and that tax assessed value is $4,200 a year. So we're $3,200 a year. That's $4,200 a year, and it's priced even about the same or better than 350. So I'll take that into account because, remember, that's a licensed appraiser at the assessor's office determining value. And they actually go out and take pictures of the house. So they're a little more accurate than Zillow. So I look at those sold houses as I go into the MLS, and I pull up 1950s house, and I pull up, you know, the X amount of bathrooms and bedrooms and fireplaces and style. And I look at the other houses that are comparable. If they all sold at 360 in the last 6 months, and their value, their assessed value, their tax roll value is at 4,000, then I'm like, okay, we're at 3,300, and we're comparable on the size of the house and the neighborhood, and we're pretty close. They all sold at 360. We might justify 350, but because the assessor's a little bit lower, we probably are going to come in a little bit lower. So with that CMA, or with that data from the MLS, combined with a Zillow estimate and combined with county assessor tax rolls, we can kind of get a determination of value. Then the other side is just going out there. I'll go out and say, okay, I've got these 4 comps here. I'm going to go look at the house. And you look at the house, you're like, wow, that's really pretty. The hedges are beautiful. They redid their driveway. It's a brand new roof. I mean, this is really, really nice. And it's sold for, 2 months ago for $335. Well, now I know my client at 350 is too high. This other house is really nice. We don't have a new roof. We don't have a new anything. So I'm thinking that we're probably closer to 320. And if we get that offer at 308, we'll probably accept it. That's where I am with one of my recent listings from last week. It's not a perfect science. And ultimately we take our cues from our clients. If our client wants to sell at 350 and we think it's worth 308, we have to tell them, hey, this is what I think. Excuse me. This is what I think the value should be. But if you want to sell it at 350, let's give it a shot. But don't be upset if it doesn't sell and we have to bring the price down a little bit. And usually they're okay with that. They appreciate the honesty. But it's up to you guys. If you determine that you want to overvalue houses in order to get listings, just be prepared. I mean, and others are playing that game too, so you're just competing with the marketplace, but be prepared for a little bit of pain if it doesn't sell. And I've been doing this long enough where my gut instinct is pretty good. I can look at a house and then I kind of go from a consumer perspective. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go take a look at these other houses. What would I want to buy? If I'm shopping and I see my house is tired and old and has deferred maintenance and everything needs to be replaced, and then I go into these fantastic houses, which one do I want to buy? It's like, well, I want to buy one of those other houses. I'm more interested in that. So if I think that, certainly these other buyers in the marketplace are going to think that as well. Now, again, it's a seller's market. It's a hot market. It's a crazy market. So if they want to jack up prices a little bit, you probably are going to have to do that. And again, you don't want to lose the listing. So just be honest and balance their expectations with what the market realities are. That's the key. That could be the real estate bumper sticker right there. So balance their expectations with the realities of the market. Yeah, that's pretty much it as far as our valuations go. Certainly when we get back into listings and stuff and sales and marketing, make sure the house is clean. I actually went over to my 90-year-old neighbors and my kids did all the yard work. They raked the leaves out. They mowed the lawn. I pressure washed. We got up on the roof and got the leaves out of there, trimmed up a few hedges, and then the professional photographer came out and took pictures, and it's like, wow, okay, it looked pretty good. But, a few bucks worth of work and a few hours worth of sweat, you can really make it look a lot nicer than maybe it is. But remember that we're in an appreciating marketplace right now. And so those appraisals and those valuations are going to lag. They just simply are. And we have to deal with that accordingly. So if you do have questions on that, go ahead and call me or email me and say, hey, we're trying to get an offer in. We've got other offers that are competing with us. We don't think it's worth $350. We're not sure the appraisal is going to come in at $350, but we have to figure out a way to get this house. And then we'll start talking about cash on hand and things like that. A big one about, I'll just kind of touch base on that again, is you don't have to put 20% down to avoid mortgage insurance. And so sometimes people, they save up 20% down. That's $100,000 on a $500,000 purchase. That's not a nice house in Seattle. That's a starter home. And so to save up $100,000 is a lot. And a lot of people don't want to pay mortgage insurance, so they think they have to do that. That's not the case. They could put 5% down. So they could put $25,000 down and have $75,000 for maintenance or painting the house or new windows, or to make up that cash difference between the offered and accepted price and the low appraisal. So let's say the low appraisal comes in $25,000 low. Well, they're putting $25,000 down, 5% down, and buying out the mortgage insurance, and typically for better interest rate than the big banks. So they're okay there. They've got a better deal. They've got $75,000. $25,000 of that can be used to make up that low appraisal. And then they got $50,000 to either invest or get new windows, new flooring, new kitchen, whatever they want to do to make it the house they want. There's a creative way to do this And it starts again with interest rates, and that's why we continually harp on fuse training and using finance to leverage more real estate. But yeah, lenders will pay the mortgage insurance, and it's usually just a 1/4 point to interest rate. But if you start off 1/2 point better than the big banks, you're still doing a 1/4 point better after you bought out the mortgage insurance. Okay, valuations. I'm going to take a sip of my English breakfast tea. I suppose, Alex, for you, I'll put my pinky up if that helps.
I think that looks good.
Yes, it's the proper way to drink your English breakfast tea. Any questions, everybody? Nope. Okay, I don't see any. So we will wrap it up on inspections, appraisals, and valuation. It's again, it's part science and it's part art, if I can say that. It is, valuations can fluctuate. Inspectors are all different. You want to find inspectors that are really good for your client, but don't kill the deal. That's a balance that they have to strike. I've seen overzealous inspectors that are like, I'm going to find everything I can with this house. Well, guess what? You just spooked the buyers. You spooked the seller if they ask for a whole bunch of stuff to be done, and the deal dies. And so you just paid someone or referred someone to pay an inspector to kill your deal, and that stinks. So there's a balance there. We want to make sure the inspectors are thorough, but they don't go in overzealously and try to kill the deal finding every little issue. If they have balance and say, well, there's some issues here, but to be expected on a house this age, but here are the main issues are right here. These are the hazards to your health that we have to take care of. Then that's fair. That's a good inspector. So you want to find inspectors that have that balance. Appraisers, again, we can't control them, but and they can be all over the place. I've seen one appraiser come in did this one last year at my sister's house. They came in at $390. Another appraiser came in a week later at $450. $390 to $450 in 1 week. It was just crazy. So they can really fluctuate in their valuations, and they can be really lazy. I did miss one little thing I want to go back and talk to you guys about. If you do get an appraisal that comes in low, you can contest it, but don't expect that it's going to be overturned. Even if you've got better comps, they probably are not going to review your comps, or if they do, they're going to raise the value up, let's say $1,000. They do that because they don't want to embarrass their appraisers. The appraisal management companies don't want to look bad. So, for example, if an appraisal management company has every other appraiser is doing bad appraisals, and they're coming in low, and they're just bad comps. If they do that, well, guess what? Bank of America is using them. Wells Fargo is using them. Then all of a sudden, their deals don't happen. The appraiser is killing the deals, and those big banks aren't happy because the loans aren't happening. They're not making money. And then they go to the appraisal management companies and say, hey, what gives? You guys are really doing a crappy job. So they don't want to admit their mistakes. It's a CYA world. So the appraisal management companies, when you contest an appraisal, they typically aren't going to make any changes because they just don't want to have a reputation with the lenders and big banks and everything of screwing up appraisals. So you can do it, but if you do, be aware of that. So, okay, that concludes the June 7th, 2017 webinar on inspections, appraisals, and valuations. If you guys have issues that come up with an appraisal, let me know. If you do your loans through K-loans, we have much more control over what we can do. And again, we can communicate directly with the appraisal management companies. We just can't communicate with the appraisers. If you need referrals for inspectors, that's fine. If you have questions on CMAs or valuations, that's fine. Just let me or any of the other managers know, and we'll help you with those. Other than that, I wish all of you a very fine week. Again, next week we are going to go back to the top and we're going to be doing paperwork. And we're going to be dealing with, I haven't decided yet if it's going to be listing paperwork and selling paperwork or what, what balance I'm going to strike. But it'll be one or the other. It'll be listing paperwork one week and it'll be selling paperwork the other. I just don't know which one we're going to start with. So, and then we'll start the whole process again with 8 different webinars, 8 different weeks. So thank you again. Everyone have a productive time out there. We are in the meat of real estate season, so a lot of stuff going on here in June. I know you're busy, and it's holiday time, so have safe travels, have fun, and communicate with me if you need me. All right, goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.